I sat frozen in the mahogany-paneled conference room as my cousin Tyler jabbed his finger at me, his voice echoing off the walls. "She's nothing but a common thief, Granddad's missing watch, the family heirloom ring cash from his study. All disappeared after her visits." The other relatives nodded, their faces twisted with disgust. Aunt Patricia clutched her pearls dramatically. "We should call the police right now." But then Mr. Jameson grandfather's longtime attorney smiled mysteriously and reached for a remote control I hadn't noticed before. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I stared at Tyler's contorted face. How could my own cousin, someone I'd grown up playing with during family barbecues, now look at me with such pure hatred? The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across the boardroom table, making everyone's expressions appear even more sinister. "Tyler, that's absolutely ridiculous," I managed to say, my voice cracking despite my efforts to sound confident. "Grandfather Harrison and I had a wonderful relationship. I visited him every Tuesday evening for dinner, and we'd talk for hours about his travels, his business ventures, his memories of grandmother Eleanor." Tyler's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Oh, spare us the innocent granddaughter act, Brooke. You think we don't know what you were really doing during those cozy little visits?" He turned to address the other family members seated around the polished conference table. She was clearly casing the place, figuring out what was worth stealing. My mouth fell open. The Tyler I remembered had been mischievous but never cruel. This man before me, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit with his blonde hair slicked back, seemed like a complete stranger. His blue eyes, once warm and playful, now burned with resentment and accusation. "Let me be very specific about what's missing." Tyler continued, pulling out his smartphone and reading from his notes. "First, grandfather's Rolex Submariner, the one with the black face that he wore every single day for 20 years. It's worth at least $50,000. Second, grandmother Eleanor's emerald engagement ring, the one that's been passed down through 3 generations. Third, exactly $3,000 in cash that he kept in his desk drawer for household expenses. Sarah, my 24-year-old cousin with perfectly straightened auburn hair and designer clothing, nodded vigorously. I was there last week helping grandfather organize his medications, and I specifically saw Brooke wandering around his private study. She claimed she was looking for a book, but she was clearly snooping through his personal belongings." Her voice carried that same manipulative tone I remembered from our childhood when she'd convince adults that her misbehavior was actually my fault. Uncle Roger, my father's older brother, slammed his meaty fist on the table. At 43 years old, he'd inherited my father's stocky build, but none of his kindness. His face was red with anger, and his receding hairline made his forehead appear even larger. "This is theft, plain and simple. Grand larceny. We're talking about felony charges here." He pointed his stubby finger at me accusingly. "Empty your purse right now. Show us what you've got hidden in there." I clutched my simple black leather handbag closer to my chest. "I'm not emptying anything. You people have lost your minds. Grandfather Harrison loved me and I loved him. I would never ever steal from him or anyone else." Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister-in-law, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She'd always been the most dramatic member of our family, prone to theatrical gestures and emotional outbursts. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and her pearl necklace caught the light as she shook her head sadly. "Oh, Harrison, if you could see what your precious Brooke has become. An embarrassment to the family name, a common criminal." The other relatives murmured their agreement. There were about 12 people total in the room, including some distant cousins and family friends I barely knew. But every single face was turned against me. Not one person offered support or questioned the accusations. The isolation felt crushing, like being trapped at the bottom of a deep well while everyone above threw stones. "I think we should call Detective Martinez right now," Uncle Roger declared, reaching for his phone. "He handled that break-in at my business last year. He'll know exactly how to deal with this situation." Tears began streaming down my cheeks. "How can you all believe this? I'm your family. I've never stolen anything in my entire life. I don't even take extra packets of ketchup from fast food restaurants because it feels wrong. Crocodile tears, Sarah muttered. She's probably been planning this for months, maybe years, building up trust with grandfather just so she could rob him blind. Tyler crossed his arms smugly. Face it, Brooke. We all know you've been struggling financially since you graduated college. That art degree isn't exactly paying the bills, is it? You're still living in that tiny studio apartment driving that beat-up Honda Civic. You saw an opportunity to solve your money problems, and you took it. The cruelty in his words stung because there was a grain of truth to them. I had been struggling to make ends meet as a freelance graphic designer. My apartment was indeed tiny, and my car was 12 years old with a dent in the passenger door. But the idea that I would steal from my beloved grandfather was so absurd, so hurtful, that I could barely breathe. Mr. Jameson, who had been sitting quietly at the head of the table this entire time, finally spoke. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His navy blue suit was impeccably tailored, and he'd been grandfather's attorney for over 30 years. Before we involve law enforcement, he said calmly, his voice cutting through the chaos, perhaps we should hear the will first. Harrison left very specific instructions about how today should proceed. Uncle Roger paused with his phone halfway to his ear. What kind of specific instructions? The attorney smiled enigmatically, the kind that suggests your grandfather was far more aware of family dynamics than any of you realized. Mr. Jameson opened a thick manila folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. His law office was on the 15th floor of a downtown skyscraper with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Before we begin, Mr. Jameson said, adjusting his glasses, I want everyone to understand that this will was finalized just 3 weeks before Harrison's passing. He was of completely sound mind and body when he made these decisions. I have medical documentation from his physician confirming his mental capacity. Tyler shifted impatiently in his leather chair. Just get on with it. We all know he left the bulk of his estate to be divided among the family members. The attorney's expression remained neutral as he began reading. I, Harrison Montgomery, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my worldly possessions as follows. He paused and looked around the room. To the American Cancer Society, I leave $10 million. To the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I leave $8 million. To the Alzheimer's Research Foundation, I leave $7 million. Sarah gasped audibly. What charity? But what about the family? Mr. Jameson continued reading without acknowledging her interruption. To the local food bank network, I leave $5 million. To the Veterans Assistance Program, I leave $4 million. To the Animal Rescue Coalition, I leave $3 million. Uncle Roger's face had turned from red to purple. This is impossible. He promised me years ago that I'd inherit enough to expand my construction business. I've been planning on that money. To St. Mary's Homeless Shelter, I leave $2 million. Mr. Jameson read on. To the Public Library Foundation, I leave $1 million. Aunt Patricia was fanning herself with her handkerchief. $40 million to strangers. What about his own flesh and blood? The attorney finally reached the family bequests. To my nephew, Roger Montgomery, I leave $20,000 and my collection of vintage fishing equipment. To my niece, Patricia Walsh, I leave $15,000 and my late wife's china cabinet. To my grandson, Tyler Montgomery, I leave $12,000 and my leather-bound first edition books. Tyler shot to his feet so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. $12,000. That's it. I expected millions. I've been working at his company for 5 years, learning the business, preparing to take over. This is insane. To my granddaughter, Sarah Walsh. Mr. Jameson continued, I leave $10,000 and my collection of antique jewelry boxes. Sarah's perfectly applied makeup was streaking down her face as she sobbed. This can't be real. I have $37,000 in credit card debt. I was counting on grandfather's money to pay it off. I bought a new car last month because I thought the inheritance was coming. The room erupted in angry voices as each family member realized their financial expectations had been crushed. I sat in stunned silence trying to process what I was hearing. Grandfather Harrison had never mentioned any of these charitable donations to me during our weekly dinners. We'd talked about everything else: his childhood during the Great Depression, his first job selling insurance door to door, how he'd built his real estate empire from nothing. "This is all her fault," Tyler suddenly screamed, pointing at me again. "She poisoned his mind against us. She convinced him we were greedy and undeserving." Uncle Roger nodded furiously. "She manipulated an old man. That's elder abuse. It's probably illegal." "I never talked to Grandfather about any of you," I protested. "Our conversations were about Book's history, his travels with Grandmother. I didn't even know he was planning to leave money to charity." Aunt Patricia rose dramatically from her chair. "You're lying. You wormed your way into his affections with your sweet little granddaughter act, and then you convinced him to cut out his real family. You're not just a thief, you're a manipulator and a liar." The hatred in the room was suffocating. These people, my own relatives, were looking at me like I was some kind of monster. I thought about all the family Christmases, birthday parties, graduation celebrations we'd shared over the years. Had they always resented me? Had they always seen me as an outsider? Mr. Jameson cleared his throat loudly. "If I may continue, there are still additional provisions in the will." "What could possibly be left?" Sarah demanded through her tears. "He's already given away everything to strangers." The attorney reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed white envelope. The paper looked expensive, and my grandfather's distinctive handwriting was visible on the front. "There is a special codicil to this will," Mr. Jameson announced, "that can only be revealed after a certain matter is resolved." Tyler's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What kind of matter?" Mr. Jameson held up the envelope so everyone could see the writing on the front. In Grandfather's careful script, it read, "To be opened only if Brooke is accused of theft." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Every eye in the room stared at that envelope, and I felt my stomach twist into knots. How could Grandfather have predicted this exact scenario? How could he have known that I would be accused of stealing from him? "Open it," Uncle Roger demanded. "Open it right now." Mr. Jameson carefully broke the wax seal on the envelope and unfolded a handwritten letter. His eyes scanned the contents first, and I watched his eyebrows raise slightly. Whatever Grandfather had written, it was clearly significant. "This letter is dated just 2 weeks before Harrison's death," the attorney began. It reads as follows: "My dear family, if you are hearing this letter, it means you have accused my beloved granddaughter Brooke of theft. I am not surprised. In fact, I have been expecting this day for quite some time." Tyler made a scoffing sound. "More manipulation from beyond the grave." Mr. Jameson continued reading. "You see, I have known for several years that various family members have been stealing from me. Yes, stealing. The very crime you now accuse Brooke of committing. I have kept detailed records of every incident, every missing item, every forged check, every lie told to cover up these thefts." The color drained from Uncle Roger's face. Sarah stopped crying and sat perfectly still. Aunt Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Tyler." Mr. Jameson read, "I know about the 8 checks you forged from my personal account over the past 8 months, amounts ranging from $500 to $1,500 each. I have copies of the bank records showing your signature practice sessions and the dates when you accessed my checkbook." Tyler's confident demeanor crumbled instantly. "That's impossible. He never said anything about missing checks." "Sarah." The attorney continued, "I am aware that you have been taking jewelry from your grandmother's collection and selling it through online auction sites. The sapphire brooch, the diamond tennis bracelet, the pearl earrings that belong to my mother. I have screenshots of the sales listings and traced the money to your personal bank account. Sarah's face went white as a sheet. She gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles were bone white. "I don't know what he's talking about," she whispered, but her voice lacked any conviction. "Roger," Mr. Jameson read on, "you have been embezzling money from our joint business investments for the past 2 years, transferring funds to your personal construction company, creating false invoices for work, never performed skimming money from property sale profits. The total amount exceeds $43,000. Uncle Roger jumped to his feet. "This is slander lies from a senile old man." The attorney held up his hand for silence and continued. "Patricia, you have been systematically stealing artwork from my home and replacing original pieces with inexpensive reproductions. The Monet watercolor from my study, the Civil War era, landscape from the dining room, the antique still life from the guest bedroom. I have documentation proving the originals were sold to private collectors in New York." Aunt Patricia collapsed back into her chair, her face ashen. How could he have possibly known about that? "Because," Mr. Jameson said, folding the letter temporarily, "Harrison had been conducting his own investigation for over a year. He hired a private detective, installed security equipment, and documented every theft meticulously." Tyler began pacing frantically behind his chair. "This is all fabricated. He was getting paranoid in his old age, seeing things that weren't there." "I'm afraid not," the attorney replied, pulling out a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. "Harrison provided me with extensive evidence, bank records, photographs, witness statements, and most importantly, video surveillance footage." The room exploded in panicked voices. Uncle Roger started shouting about privacy laws and illegal recording. Sarah begged everyone to just forget about everything and move on. Aunt Patricia claimed she was going to be sick and needed to leave immediately. But Mr. Jameson wasn't finished reading the letter. "Now about my dear Brooke," he continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The items you claim she stole, the watch, the ring, and the cash, were given to her by me as early inheritance gifts. I have written documentation of each transfer signed and notarized." My heart almost stopped beating. "What?" The attorney smiled at me kindly. "Your grandfather gave you those items legally and properly. He predicted that when they were discovered missing, the family would blame you rather than investigate the real thieves." I thought back to my last few visits with grandfather. 3 weeks ago, he had insisted I take his Rolex. "This watch has served me well for 20 years, he'd said. "It should go to someone who values time spent with family." The emerald ring had been pressed into my hands just 2 weeks before his death. "Your grandmother would want you to have this," he'd whispered. "You have her gentle spirit." And the cash he'd given me, $3,000 to help with my student loans, making me promise not to mention it to the rest of the family. Furthermore, Mr. Jameson read, "I have been testing each family member's character and integrity over the past several years. I deliberately left valuables in accessible places, created opportunities for theft, and observed how each person responded. Brooke is the only family member who never took anything without permission, never asked me for money, and visited me solely out of love, rather than expectation of inheritance." Tyler's face was now bright red with rage and embarrassment. "So what if we took a few things? He had millions of dollars. He wouldn't have missed any of it." "That attitude," Mr. Jameson said, looking directly at Tyler, "is exactly what your grandfather was talking about. He knew that you all viewed him as a bank account rather than a human being." Uncle Roger suddenly lunged toward the attorney's briefcase. "I want to see this supposed evidence. This is all a setup, some kind of elaborate hoax." But Mr. Jameson was prepared for this reaction. He calmly pulled out a tablet computer and several external hard drives. "Harrison anticipated that you would demand proof. He left very specific instructions for me to show you exactly what kind of evidence he collected." Sarah was crying again, but these tears seemed different than before. These looked like tears of genuine panic rather than disappointment. "Please don't show anyone. I'll pay everything back. I'll do anything to make this right." "The time for making things right," the attorney said solemnly, "was before you decided to steal from a man who trusted and loved you. He powered on the tablet and connected one of the external drives. Harrison installed hidden cameras throughout his mansion specifically to catch the thefts in progress. He wanted irrefutable proof of each family member's actions. The blood drained from every face in the room except mine. I realized that grandfather hadn't just been a kind, trusting old man. He'd been a brilliant businessman who understood human nature better than any of us had imagined. Your grandfather, Mr. Jameson announced, expected this exact conversation to take place. He said, and I quote, "When they accuse Brooke of theft, you will show them the cameras. Let them see who the real thieves are." Mr. Jameson stood up and wheeled a large flat-screen monitor from the corner of the conference room to where everyone could see it clearly. The screen was at least 50 inches mounted on a professional-grade rolling cart. He connected the tablet to the display and dimmed the overhead lights slightly. "Before we begin," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I want everyone to understand that this footage was recorded legally in Harrison's private residence. He had every right to install security cameras in his own home." Tyler was sweating profusely now, loosening his silk tie. "This is entrapment. It's illegal to record people without their consent." "Actually," Mr. Jameson replied calmly, "Pennsylvania law allows homeowners to record activities on their own property without notification. Harrison was well within his legal rights." The first video file loaded on the screen. The timestamp showed it was recorded at 11:47 at night just 2 months ago. The camera was positioned to capture grandfather's home office with its rich wood paneling, built-in bookshelves, and antique mahogany desk. At first the room appeared empty. Then Tyler's figure came into view, moving stealthily through the doorway. He was dressed in dark clothing and kept looking over his shoulder nervously. In the video, he approached the large desk and began quietly opening drawers. "Turn it off," Tyler demanded, his voice cracking. "I don't want to watch this." But Mr. Jameson continued playing the footage. On screen, Tyler found what he was looking for and pulled out grandfather's checkbook. He sat down in the leather desk chair and began practicing grandfather's signature on a piece of scrap paper, checking his forgery attempts against actual checks. After several minutes of practice, he carefully tore out a blank check and filled it out for $1,200 made payable to cash. The most damning part came when Tyler held up the forged check. To the light, smiled with satisfaction and whispered to himself, "The old man is losing his mind anyway. He'll never notice one little check." Sarah gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. "Tyler, how could you say something so cruel about grandfather?" On the screen, Tyler continued his theft by photographing several other checks with his phone, presumably to practice the forgeries later. He returned the checkbook to its exact position and crept back out of the room. "This is just the first incident," Mr. Jameson announced. "There are 7 more videos of Tyler forging checks and stealing cash." Tyler slumped forward in his chair, holding his head in his hands. "Okay, fine. I took some money, but I was planning to pay it back eventually." "Eventually," the attorney repeated dryly. "Your grandfather waited 14 months for eventually to arrive." The next video began playing automatically. This one was filmed in grandfather's master bedroom, where grandmother Eleanor's jewelry collection was displayed in an ornate antique armoire. The timestamp showed it was recorded on a Sunday afternoon just 6 weeks ago. Sarah appeared on the screen wearing the same yellow sundress I remembered her wearing to grandfather's birthday dinner. She moved directly to the jewelry armoire and began systematically going through the compartments. She selected several pieces, including the sapphire brooch that had been grandmother's favorite and a diamond tennis bracelet worth thousands of dollars. But what made the footage even more disturbing was Sarah's casual attitude. She examined each piece like she was shopping at a department store, holding items up to the light to assess their value. At one point, she answered her cell phone while holding grandmother's pearl earrings. "Hey, Marcus," she said to whoever was calling. "Yeah, I'm at grandfather's house. I found some more stuff I can sell. These pearls should cover my car payment this month." The person on the phone must have asked about getting caught because Sarah laughed. "He's taking his afternoon nap. Besides, he's got so much jewelry here he'll never miss a few pieces. I'm not being greedy, just taking what I need." Sarah in the conference room was sobbing uncontrollably now. "I had gambling debts. I owed money to dangerous people. I was desperate." Desperation. Mr. Jameson observed, doesn't justify theft from a family member who would have helped you if you'd simply asked. The third video was the most shocking yet. It showed Uncle Roger in Grandfather's home office, but during daylight hours. He wasn't trying to hide his activities at all. Instead, he was sitting openly at the desk using Grandfather's computer and printer. On screen, Uncle Roger was printing out false invoices from his construction company. The invoices were for work allegedly performed on Grandfather's various rental properties, but the dates and descriptions were completely fabricated. He then used Grandfather's business account checkbook to write checks paying these fake invoices. The audio quality was excellent, and we could hear Uncle Roger talking to himself as he worked. $2,300 for roof repairs that never happened, he muttered while writing one check. $1,500 for plumbing work I never did. The old fool trusts me completely. At one point in the video, Grandfather himself walked into the office. Uncle Roger quickly minimized the computer screen and pretended to be reading a magazine. "Roger, what brings you by today?" Grandfather asked warmly. "Just wanted to spend some time with my favorite brother-in-law," Uncle Roger replied with a convincing smile. "Maybe look over those property reports you mentioned." "Of course," Grandfather said. "I'll be in the garden if you need anything." As soon as Grandfather left the room, Uncle Roger returned to his forgery operation, actually chuckling to himself about how easy it was to deceive a trusting old man. Uncle Roger was staring at the screen in horror. "How long was he recording me?" "Every visit for the past 18 months, Mr. Jameson answered. "Harrison documented over $43,000 in fraudulent charges from your company." The final video featured Aunt Patricia, and it was perhaps the most elaborate theft of all. The camera captured her in the formal dining room, carefully removing a beautiful landscape painting from the wall. But instead of simply stealing it, she hung a reproduction in its place. The video showed her comparing the original and the fake side by side, making sure the replacement was positioned correctly. She even adjusted the frame slightly to match the dust pattern on the wall. It was clearly not her first time performing this switch. "The reproduction cost me $800, she said to someone off camera, presumably an accomplice. "But the original will sell for at least $25,000. Grandfather will never know the difference." What made this theft particularly heartless was that the painting had obvious sentimental value. The camera captured Aunt Patricia, reading the inscription on the back of the frame, "To my beloved Harrison, our first home together. Happy anniversary, my darling. Love always, Eleanor." She read the touching message from my deceased grandmother and then casually tossed the frame into a large bag, showing no emotion whatsoever about destroying a precious memory. Aunt Patricia was hyperventilating now, fanning herself desperately with her handkerchief. "I needed the money for my daughter's college tuition. I was trying to provide for my family's future." "By stealing from another family member's past," Mr. Jameson said quietly, "you took irreplaceable memories that belonged to Harrison and Eleanor." The room was completely silent except for the sound of Sarah's continued sobbing and Uncle Roger's heavy breathing. Everyone stared at the blank screen, processing what they had just witnessed. Tyler finally broke the silence. "How many people has he shown these videos to?" Mr. Jameson smiled grimly. "So far, just this room, but that's about to change." He reached for the tablet again and loaded one final video file. Harrison recorded this message specifically for today's meeting. He wanted to address each of you directly. The screen filled with an image of my beloved grandfather sitting in his favorite leather armchair in his study. He looked frail but alert, wearing the navy blue cardigan I'd given him for his last birthday. His white hair was neatly combed and his kind brown eyes looked directly into the camera. "Hello, my family," Grandfather's voice said from the speakers. "If you're watching this recording, it means you have accused my dear Brooke of theft. Now you know who the real thieves are." Even though he was speaking from beyond the grave, Grandfather's presence filled the room with authority and disappointment. Every family member shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I am not angry with you," he continued. "I am deeply, profoundly sad. Sad that you chose greed over love, dishonesty over family loyalty, and theft over simply asking for help." Grandfather's image on the screen looked tired but determined. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly in his chair, creating an intimate feeling despite the recorded nature of his message. "Tyler," he said, looking directly into the camera, "you are my grandson, and I remember teaching you to ride a bicycle in my driveway when you were 7 years old. You fell down 6 times, but you kept getting back up. I was so proud of your persistence. What happened to that honest, determined little boy?" Tyler couldn't meet the screen. He stared down at his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "The money you stole from me," Grandfather continued, "totaled nearly $11,000 over 8 months. If you had simply told me you were having financial difficulties, I would have gladly given you twice that amount. Instead, you chose to betray my trust and forge my signature. You reduced our relationship to a criminal transaction." The camera angle shifted slightly as Grandfather reached for a glass of water on the side table. His hands trembled with age, but his voice remained strong and clear. "Sarah, my dear granddaughter, you have your grandmother's beautiful smile and her artistic talents. I still have the clay sculpture you made for me in elementary school sitting on my bookshelf. You painted it blue because you said it matched my eyes." Sarah's sobs intensified, and she covered her face with both hands. "But you chose to steal your grandmother's jewelry," Grandfather said sadly. "Pieces that held decades of memories, anniversaries, special occasions, moments of love between Eleanor and me. You sold these treasures to strangers for gambling money. Do you understand that those items were irreplaceable?" The video continued as Grandfather addressed Uncle Roger directly. "Roger, you married my daughter Helen, and I welcomed you into our family with open arms. I trusted you with my business investments, shared my knowledge of real estate development, and treated you like the son I never had." Uncle Roger was grinding his teeth, his jaw muscles visibly tense. "You repaid that trust by creating false invoices, stealing money meant for property maintenance, and lying to my face for over 2 years. $43,000, Roger. You stole enough money to buy a luxury car, and you did it by deceiving a man who considered you family." Grandfather's expression grew even more somber as he turned his attention to Aunt Patricia. "Patricia, you have always been dramatic, but I never thought you would be dishonest. You systematically stole artwork from my home pieces that Eleanor and I collected during our travels around the world." Aunt Patricia had stopped fanning herself and sat perfectly still like a statue. "That landscape painting you took," Grandfather continued, "was the view from the window of our first apartment together. Eleanor painted the inscription herself for our first wedding anniversary. You read those words, Patricia. You saw how much that painting meant to us, and you stole it anyway." The old man paused and took another sip of water. When he continued, his tone became more philosophical. "I spent the last year of my life learning who my family members really were when they thought no one was watching. It was the most heartbreaking education of my entire life. Each of you proved that you valued my money more than my love, my possessions more than our relationships." He gestured towards something off camera, but there was one exception. One family member who never took anything without asking, never showed up only when she needed something, never calculated my net worth while hugging me goodbye. My heart began pounding as I realized he was about to talk about me. "Brooke," he said, and his whole demeanor changed. His face softened and he smiled genuinely for the first time in the recording. "My dear, sweet Brooke, you visited me every Tuesday evening not because you wanted something, but because you enjoyed my company. We talked about books, history, philosophy, life lessons I'd learned over 8 decades of living." Tears were streaming down my face as I listened to his words. "You never asked me for money even though I knew you were struggling financially. You never hinted about inheritance or expressed interest in my possessions. You loved me for who I was, not what I owned. That kind of love is rarer than any treasure I could leave behind. The camera angle widened to show more of Grandfather's study. I could see familiar objects in the background, the antique globe we used to spin together, the chess set where he taught me strategy, the photo of him and Grandmother on their honeymoon in Italy. Therefore, Grandfather announced, his voice taking on a more formal tone, I am changing my will one final time. The charitable donations I mentioned earlier will stand as planned, but there are additional bequests that Mr. Jameson was instructed to reveal only after this video was played. Mr. Jameson paused the recording and pulled out yet another sealed envelope. This one was marked, Final Codicil to be read after video message. Tyler looked up with desperate hope in his eyes. Maybe he's forgiven us. Maybe he's giving us another chance. But Mr. Jameson's expression suggested otherwise. He opened the envelope and began reading. To my granddaughter, Brooke, who showed me what family love really means, I leave my personal residence at 15 Maple Grove Lane, including all furnishings and personal belongings. My mouth fell open. Grandfather's mansion was worth at least $2 million. I also leave to Brooke my collection of 3 vintage automobiles, the 1967 Mustang convertible, the 1955 Thunderbird, and the 1970 Camaro SS. Sarah gasped. Those cars are worth a fortune. Mr. Jameson continued reading. Finally, I leave to Brooke a trust fund in the amount of $5 million to be managed by Jameson Legal Associates until she reaches the age of 30, at which point she will gain full control of the principal and accumulated interest. The room exploded in angry voices. Tyler shot to his feet again, screaming about unfairness and legal challenges. Uncle Roger threatened to contest the will in court. Aunt Patricia declared that the whole family would disown me. But Mr. Jameson wasn't finished. There are conditions attached to these bequests, he announced, and the room quieted down. Brooke will inherit these assets only if she agrees to one specific requirement. My heart sank. Of course there were conditions. Grandfather was a businessman after all. What requirement? I asked nervously. The attorney smiled. Your grandfather wrote, and I quote, Brooke must promise to use this inheritance wisely and generously to help others as she has helped me, and to always remember that true wealth comes from the love we give and receive, not from the money we accumulate. Relief flooded through my body. Those weren't restrictions. They were values I already believed in. But Grandfather's video message wasn't over. Mr. Jameson restarted the recording, and my grandfather's face reappeared on the screen. Now, for those of you who stole from me, he said, his tone becoming stern again, there will be consequences. I have already prepared detailed financial records documenting every theft, every forged check, every fraudulent transaction. These records have been filed with the appropriate authorities. Tyler's face went white. What authorities? Grandfather smiled grimly on the screen. The police, the district attorney's office, the state fraud investigation unit, and the Internal Revenue Service. You see, when you steal money, you're supposed to report it as income on your tax returns. I don't believe any of you did that. Uncle Roger was hyperventilating now. This is revenge from beyond the grave. You can't prosecute dead people for reporting crimes. Actually, Mr. Jameson interjected, victims of crimes can file reports that remain valid even after their death. Harrison was very thorough in his documentation. The video continued with Grandfather's final words. I hope that someday you will understand that love and trust, once broken, are almost impossible to repair. You chose to see me as a source of money rather than as a human being who cherished his family. The consequences of that choice will follow you for the rest of your lives. The screen went black and we all sat in stunned silence. Grandfather had orchestrated this entire confrontation from beyond the grave, exposing the thieves, protecting my reputation, and ensuring that justice would be served. But apparently he still wasn't finished with his surprises. Mr. Jameson reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a manila folder marked Criminal Evidence, Copy for District Attorney. The folder was at least 3 inches thick. Your grandfather spent over $60,000 hiring private investigators, forensic accountants, and security specialists to document these crimes, he announced. This evidence has been turned over to law enforcement, and arrest warrants have already been issued. As if summoned by some cosmic timing, there was a sharp knock on the conference room door. The conference room door opened and 3 people in professional attire entered the room. The woman leading the group wore a charcoal gray pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio. She had short brown hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Good afternoon," she said, displaying a gold badge and identification card. "I'm Detective Williams with the Philadelphia Police Department Financial Crimes Division. We're looking for Tyler Montgomery, Sarah Walsh, Roger Montgomery, and Patricia Walsh." The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the distant sound of traffic from the street 15 floors below, but inside the conference room, nobody seemed to be breathing. Detective Williams was accompanied by 2 uniformed officers, both young and professional-looking. One was a tall African-American man with kind eyes, and the other was a petite Hispanic woman with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. They stood by the door, not threatening, but clearly prepared for any situation. Based on evidence provided by the late Harrison Montgomery, Detective Williams continued, "We have arrest warrants for multiple felony charges, including grand theft, forgery, fraud, and conspiracy." Tyler slowly raised his hand like a schoolchild. "I'm Tyler Montgomery." His voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah continued sobbing but managed to identify herself. Uncle Roger looked like he might try to run, but the uniformed officers had positioned themselves strategically near the exit. Aunt Patricia seemed to have gone into shock, staring blankly at the detective's badge. Detective Williams opened her portfolio and began reading from official-looking documents. "Tyler Montgomery, you are under arrest for 8 counts of check forgery, 7 counts of grand theft, and 3 counts of fraud. The total amount stolen exceeds $11,000. One of the uniformed officers approached Tyler with handcuffs. Tyler didn't resist, but he kept shaking his head in disbelief. "This is really happening," he muttered. "This is actually happening." Sarah Walsh. The detective continued, "You are under arrest for 12 counts of grand theft, 4 counts of receiving stolen property, and 2 counts of tax evasion. The total value of stolen items exceeds $18,000. Sarah collapsed into her chair, hyperventilating. "I need a lawyer. I can't breathe. Someone call my mother." Roger Montgomery. Detective Williams read, "You are under arrest for 23 counts of fraud, 11 counts of forgery, and multiple counts of embezzlement. The total amount stolen exceeds $43,000. Uncle Roger finally exploded. "This is entrapment. Harrison set us up. He deliberately left things lying around, tempting us to take them. No jury will convict us." The detective looked at him calmly. "Sir, leaving your own possessions in your own home is not entrapment. Stealing those possessions, regardless of their accessibility, is a crime." As the arrests continued, I found myself thinking about each family member differently than I had just hours earlier. Tyler, who I'd once looked up to as my successful older cousin, was actually a desperate man who'd been forging checks to maintain his expensive lifestyle. Sarah, who always seemed so put together and confident, had been stealing family heirlooms to feed a gambling addiction. Uncle Roger, who'd always presented himself as a successful businessman, had been running a failing company and stealing from his own family to cover his losses. And Aunt Patricia, who prided herself on being cultured and sophisticated, had been systematically looting grandfather's art collection. Patricia Walsh. Detective Williams announced, "You are under arrest for 9 counts of grand theft, 4 counts of trafficking in stolen goods, and multiple counts of tax evasion. The total value of stolen artwork exceeds $72,000. Aunt Patricia finally snapped back to reality when she heard the dollar amount. $72,000. That's impossible. I only took a few small pieces. "Ma'am," the detective replied. Stolen artwork was recovered from galleries in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Your grandfather's private investigators traced every sale. As each family member was read their rights and processed, I sat in my chair feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Part of me felt vindicated that the truth was finally coming out, but another part felt genuinely sad for these people who had destroyed their own lives through greed and dishonesty. Detective Williams approached me after the arrests were completed. Ms. Brooke Montgomery? Yes, that's me. I need to inform you that as the primary beneficiary of Harrison Montgomery's estate, you'll be required to testify in the criminal proceedings against these defendants. Are you prepared for that responsibility? I thought about grandfather's message about standing up for truth and justice. Yes, I'm prepared to testify. The detective nodded approvingly. Your grandfather also left instructions that you should be given a choice about the prosecution of these cases. He wrote a letter specifically about that decision. Mr. Jameson handed me an envelope marked "For Brooke's Eyes Only" regarding criminal prosecution. Inside was a handwritten note in grandfather's familiar script. My dear Brooke. The letter began, if you are reading this, then justice has finally caught up with the family thieves. You now have a choice to make. You can push for maximum prosecution, or you can show mercy and advocate for reduced sentences in exchange for full restitution. I looked around the conference room at the chaos. Tyler was crying quietly as he was handcuffed. Sarah was having a panic attack and hyperventilating into a paper bag. Uncle Roger was still arguing with the officers about his rights. Aunt Patricia was sitting in stunned silence, her perfect makeup completely ruined. Grandfather's letter continued. I leave this choice to you because you have shown wisdom and compassion that the others lack. Whatever you decide, I will support from beyond. Trust your heart, my dear granddaughter. The weight of this decision felt enormous. These people had betrayed our family, stolen from a trusting elderly man, and falsely accused me of crimes they had committed. They deserved to face the full consequences of their actions. But I also thought about what grandfather would have wanted. He was hurt by their betrayal, but he wasn't a vindictive man. He believed in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility that people could learn from their mistakes and become better. I stood up and addressed Detective Williams. I'd like to make a statement about the prosecution of these cases. The room went quiet. Even Tyler stopped crying and looked at me with desperate hope. I want full restitution for everything that was stolen, I announced. Every penny, every item, every forgery. But I'm willing to support reduced sentences if the defendants agree to community service focused on helping elderly people who've been victims of financial crimes. Tyler's relief was visible. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much. But I wasn't finished. However, if any of them refuse to pay full restitution, or if any of them commit similar crimes in the future, I want the original charges reinstated and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Detective Williams nodded. That's a very reasonable position. We'll work with the district attorney's office to structure plea agreements accordingly. As the family members were led away in handcuffs, Mr. Jameson began organizing the paperwork for my inheritance. But I had one more surprise coming. Oh, I almost forgot, the attorney said, pulling out his smartphone. Your grandfather also arranged for the local news media to cover this story. He thought it was important for the community to understand how elder financial abuse happens even within families. Through the conference room windows, I could see news vans pulling up outside the building. Cameramen and reporters were setting up on the sidewalk below. What? I asked in disbelief. Mr. Jameson smiled. Harrison wanted this to be a teaching moment. He believed that exposing these crimes publicly might prevent other elderly people from being victimized by their own families. I realized that grandfather's plan had been even more comprehensive than I'd imagined. Not only had he protected me and ensured justice for himself, but he'd also created a public awareness campaign about elder financial abuse. As we prepared to leave the law office, I thought about how completely my life had changed in just a few hours. I'd gone from being falsely accused of theft to inheriting millions of dollars. My relationship with my extended family was permanently damaged, but I'd learned the truth about their character. Most importantly, I'd been entrusted with carrying forward grandfather's values of honesty, generosity, and compassion. The inheritance wasn't just money and property. It was a responsibility to use those resources to help others and honor his memory. 6 months later, I was sitting in the beautifully restored study of grandfather's mansion, which was now legally my home. The room looked exactly as it had during his lifetime, with the same leather-bound books lining the walls, the same antique globe in the corner, and the same chess set where he'd taught me strategy and patience. But some things had changed dramatically. The house no longer felt empty and quiet. Instead, it had become the headquarters for the Harrison Montgomery Foundation for Elder Protection, a nonprofit organization I'd established using a significant portion of my inheritance. The foundation's mission was simple but important to help elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse, particularly from their own family members. We provided free security consultations, legal aid, financial monitoring services, and emergency assistance to seniors who'd been victimized. Our offices occupied the mansion's former guest bedrooms and sitting rooms staffed by social workers, legal advocates, and retired police officers who specialized in financial crimes. The dining room had been converted into a meeting space where we held monthly support groups for elderly victims of theft and fraud. Tyler's criminal case had been resolved 3 months ago. He'd pled guilty to all charges and received 18 months probation in exchange for paying full restitution plus 20% interest. As part of his community service, he spent 15 hours every week helping elderly clients of our foundation install security cameras and organize their financial records. Working with theft victims had been a humbling experience for Tyler. He'd recently written me a letter apologizing for his actions and thanking me for giving him a chance at redemption. "I never understood how much damage I was causing," he wrote. Meeting with Mr. Chen, whose own grandson stole his life savings, made me realize that I wasn't just taking grandfather's money. I was destroying his ability to trust the people he loved most. Sarah's situation had been more complex because of her gambling addiction. She'd spent 90 days in residential treatment and was now attending weekly therapy sessions. Her community service involved working at a senior center, helping elderly people with computer skills and social media literacy. She discovered that she genuinely enjoyed spending time with older adults, listening to their stories and learning from their experiences. Grandfather was right, she'd told me during our last conversation. I was so focused on my immediate problems that I never appreciated what an incredible person he was. These seniors I work with now remind me of him every day. They're wise, funny, and so much more interesting than I ever bothered to notice. Uncle Roger's construction business had gone bankrupt during the legal proceedings, but he'd found work with a nonprofit organization that provided home repairs for low-income elderly homeowners. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that he was now using his construction skills to help rather than exploit older adults. He'd struggled the most with accepting responsibility for his actions, but 6 months of working directly with elderly clients had gradually changed his perspective. "I used to think of old people as easy targets," he'd admitted to me recently. "Now I see them as someone's grandparent, someone who worked their whole life and deserves respect and protection." Aunt Patricia had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. Her community service involved working at an art therapy program for seniors with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. She discovered that her knowledge of art history and her dramatic personality were actually valuable assets in helping confused elderly patients connect with their memories through creative expression. "I spent so many years viewing art as a commodity," she'd confessed during one of our foundation meetings. "Working with these patients has reminded me that art is about human connection, emotion, and preserving memories. I'm ashamed that I treated grandfather's collection like it was just merchandise to be sold." All 4 family members had paid complete restitution for their thefts. The money had been donated directly to the foundation, where it was used to help other elderly victims recover from financial abuse. In a strange way, their crimes had been transformed into a source of healing for other families. But the most significant change had been in how I viewed my own role in the community. Before grandfather's death, I'd been struggling to find direction in my life, working small freelance design jobs and barely making ends meet. Now I had purpose and resources to make a real difference. The foundation had helped over 300 elderly clients in just 6 months. We'd recovered nearly $2 million in stolen assets, prosecuted dozens of financial predators, and prevented countless additional thefts through our security and education programs. One of our most successful initiatives was the Family Financial Safety Workshops we held twice monthly. These sessions taught elderly people how to recognize warning signs of financial abuse, set up proper legal protections, and have honest conversations with family members about money and inheritance. The workshops were always well attended, often with 50 to 60 participants per session. Many attendees brought their adult children, creating opportunities for families to discuss financial matters openly rather than leaving everything shrouded in secrecy and speculation. Detective Williams, who had arrested my family members 6 months earlier, had become a regular guest speaker at our workshops. She helped participants understand how financial crimes were investigated and prosecuted, and she shared stories of successful recoveries that gave hope to current victims. The Harrison Montgomery case was unique, she told workshop participants, because the victim had the foresight and resources to gather evidence before confronting the perpetrators. Most elderly victims don't have those advantages, which is why organizations like this foundation are so crucial. The local media had continued following our story, and the foundation had received extensive positive coverage. Several other cities had contacted us about replicating our model in their communities. I'd been invited to speak at conferences about elder abuse, prevention, sharing grandfather's story as an example of how victims could take control of their situations. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my work was the personal relationships I developed with the elderly clients we served. Each person had a unique story, a lifetime of experiences and wisdom that had been nearly destroyed by family betrayal. Mrs. Henderson, an 83-year-old retired teacher, had been swindled out of $40,000 by her own daughter. Through the foundation's legal aid program, we'd helped her recover most of the money and establish better financial safeguards. "Your grandfather would be so proud of what you've accomplished," she told me during our last meeting. "He turned his own pain into protection for others. That's the definition of wisdom." Mr. Rodriguez, a 79-year-old veteran, had lost his entire pension to a fraudulent investment scheme promoted by his nephew. Our foundation helped him file criminal charges and connected him with federal agencies that eventually recovered his lost retirement funds. "I was ashamed to tell anyone what happened," he'd confided. "I felt stupid for trusting family, but working with your organization showed me that trust isn't stupid. Betraying trust is what's shameful." These conversations reminded me daily of why the foundation's work was so important. Every elderly person we helped represented someone's parent, grandparent, or beloved family member. They deserve protection, respect, and dignity, not exploitation by people who should have loved them most. The foundation had also given me a new understanding of grandfather's final gift to me. The inheritance wasn't just money and property, it was the opportunity to carry forward his values and make a positive impact on the world. He'd known that I would use the resources wisely, not for personal luxury, but for helping others. As I sat in his study on this quiet Tuesday evening, exactly the time when I used to visit him for our weekly dinners, I could almost feel his presence in the room. The chess set was positioned exactly as we'd left it during our last game, together with his white pieces in a winning position as usual. On my desk was a framed photograph from his 82nd birthday party, showing our entire family gathered around him as he blew out the candles on his cake. In the photo, Tyler is smiling broadly, Sarah is laughing at something Uncle Roger said, and Aunt Patricia is adjusting her hair for the camera. Everyone looks happy, loving, and genuine. I often wondered if Grandfather had already suspected their thefts when that photo was taken, or if the betrayals had come later. Either way, he'd chosen to handle the situation with wisdom rather than vindictiveness, creating consequences that led to growth and redemption rather than just punishment. The Foundation's success had taught me that Grandfather's approach had been correct. People could change when given the right incentives and opportunities. My family members had transformed from thieves into advocates for elderly protection, using their experiences to help prevent others from making similar mistakes. Most importantly, I'd learned that true wealth really did come from the love we give and receive, not from the money we accumulate. The inheritance had given me financial security, but the relationships I'd built through foundation work had given me purpose and meaning. Every elderly client who trusted us with their story, every family that learned to communicate honestly about financial matters, every prevented theft or recovered asset represented a victory for the values Grandfather had tried to instill in our family. As I prepared to leave the study and head home to my apartment, I noticed that someone had left a small envelope on the chessboard. Inside was a handwritten note from Tyler. Dear Brooke, it read, "Today marks 6 months since my arrest. I wanted you to know that working with elder abuse victims has completely changed my perspective on what happened with Grandfather. I understand now that I wasn't just taking his money. I was stealing his peace of mind and his ability to trust his family. I'm grateful that you chose mercy over vengeance and gave me the chance to try to make amends. I'll spend the rest of my life working to earn back the Montgomery family name. Thank you for showing me what real character looks like." The note was signed simply, "Your cousin Tyler." I smiled as I read his words, thinking about how proud Grandfather would be to see Tyler taking responsibility and working to help others. The Foundation had given all of us a chance at redemption, a way to transform our family story from one of betrayal into one of healing and service. As I walked through the mansion one final time before leaving, I stopped in the dining room where our family used to gather for holiday meals. The room now hosted our support groups where elderly abuse victims found comfort and strength in sharing their experiences with others who understood their pain. The transformation was symbolic of everything Grandfather had accomplished through his careful planning. He'd taken a house that had become associated with theft and betrayal and turned it into a place of healing and protection. He'd taken family members who had chosen greed over love and given them a path back to honor and service. Most importantly, he'd ensured that his legacy would be measured not by the wealth he'd accumulated, but by the number of elderly people who were safer because of the foundation he'd made possible through his inheritance to me. Before I tell you about what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between justice and mercy when someone hurt you deeply? How did you decide what was the right thing to do? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or made you think about your own family relationships, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for what's right. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about elder financial abuse prevention, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to Grandfather's story and mine. I hope it reminds you that our greatest inheritance isn't money or possessions, but the values we choose to live by and pass on to others. Remember that true wealth comes from the love we give and the positive impact we make in the lives of others. Take care of each other out there, and never forget to protect and cherish the elderly people in your life. They have so much wisdom to share if we just take the time to listen.